Okay, Be'ezras Hashem. Today's daf is Masechta Kiddushin Daf Lamed Zayin. We're going to start from the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Vav Lamed Beis. The Mishnah begins. Kol mitzvah, the bottom of the page. Kol mitzvah shehi, any mitzvah shehi tluya ba'aretz. Any mitzvah that has to do with Eretz Yisrael. Okay, ein neheges ala ba'aretz. It only has to do. It applies in Eretz Yisrael. For example, Truma. Truma applies only in Israel and has nothing in Chutz La'aretz. There is no Truma. That's v'she'ena tlui ba'aretz if it has nothing to do with Eretz Yisrael. For example, let's say the mitzvah of kibbud avein. So that mitzvah noihages applies bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz. Applies both in Eretz Yisrael and both in Chutz La'aretz. Now we go to the top of the page. Lamed Zayin chutz exception arla. Arla, hi, Alan. We just began. Chutz, the exception to this rule is Arla and Kalayim. Although we said that every mitzvah that has to do with the land of Israel only applies in Israel, the Arla prohibition and the mitzvah of not mixing two different fruits and produce, Kalayim, apply not only in Eretz Yisrael but also in Chutz La'aretz. The halacha, it's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. For Arla and Kalayim, it's only midrabanan. It applies over here. So that's the exception. Rabbi Lezer says, af he-chodesh, even chodesh. Now Rabbi Lezer is a question. What did he mean? Even chodesh applies in Chutz La'aretz? Or does he mean it only applies in Eretz Yisrael? Rabbi Lezer remains, but what is chodesh? Chodesh, as you know, that till after the first day of Chol Hamoed, the second day, basically, or the first day of Pesach, you can't eat the new crop. You have to wait till they brought the Karban Omer, and then afterwards you can eat Chodesh. That mitzvah only applies. We don't know what Rabbi Lezer's opinion is, what the Chachamim's opinion is. That will be discussed in the Gemara. So now we go to Lamed Amud Aleph, and we're starting the Gemara. My tluya, my shteina tluya. What did the Mishnah mean that anything that is dependent on Israel, on the land, it applies in Eretz Yisrael, and if it's not dependent on the land, it applies even in Chutz La'aretz. Tluya. What does it mean tluya? Diksiv be'bia. When the Torah wrote the mitzvah, it says when you will come to Israel, you'll do this mitzvah. That means it's connected to the land. When you will come to Israel, you will do this mitzvah. And what does she'ena tluya means? It has nothing to do with the land. When it doesn't say anything when you come to Israel, do Hashavas Aveda, for example. Torah doesn't say anything like that. So that is not an Israel-related mitzvah. So the Gemara questions that understanding of the Mishnah. V'harei tefillin upetach hamor. Tefillin, interestingly enough, the Torah says, and you have it written inside your tefillin, kivi ya'acha, when you will come to Israel, then put on tefillin. Or petach hamor. The petach hamor is the kedushas of the donkey. You have to exchange it for a sheep. The both of them, it say the concept of bia when you come to Israel. And we know that tefillin applies bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz. Even in chutz la'aretz, you have to wear tefillin. Now it's not clear why you have to wear tefillin in chutz la'aretz. The Torah says kivi yacha, when you come to Israel, put on tefillin. Maybe you have to put on tefillin only in Israel. So the answer is, Rashi says, we find many Rabbanan Amoraim that lived in Bavel that put on tefillin. That's Rashi's whole proof that if you look in the Rashi, that for that reason we put on tefillin in Chutz La'aretz. But they have other reasons. The Torah says when you'll be thrown out of Israel, and then the Torah says put on your tefillin. So in the second V'hoyim Shmai, that's what it says. So tefillin applies even to Chutz La'aretz. Anyway, our understanding of the Mishnah is all wrong. So how do you explain our Mishnah? Amar Rav Yehuda said this is the explanation of the Mishnah, and it's the way that we said it. Hachi Kamar, this is what the Mishnah says. Kol mitzvah shechoivas haguf, any mitzvah that has to do with your body. For example, the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, the mitzvah of kibbud avein. So that mitzvah, Mehagas, applies, bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz, whether you're in Eretz Yisrael or whether you're outside of Israel. Choivas karka, but if it has to do with the land itself, it's a land-based mitzvah. Truma, leket, shikha, peah, trumas, maisris, shmita, chadash, all these things apply in Eretz Yisrael, but don't apply in Chutz La'aretz. Ein in Heges Alabaretz, it doesn't apply in Chutz La'aretz. So there are certain mitzvahs that only apply in Israel and do not apply in Chutz La'aretz. So the Gemara asks the question, Menahani Mili, where do I know that that's, let's say, a kibbud of the a mitzvah apply in Chutz La'aretz? Maybe the Torah was only given in Israel. Only in Israel you keep the Torah, and outside of Israel you don't have to keep the Torah. So the Tana Rabbanan, that's not true. The Tana Rabbanan we learned in the Brisa. So let's bring up the pasuk. I'm going to be referring to this other sheet on the screen. So because there's going to be a lot of psukim quoted in today's daf. But the first of the psukim is, the Torah says, Eila hachukim v'hamishpatim asher tishmu lasis, the following of the laws that you have to make sure to keep. Ba'aretz, in Eretz Yisrael. So that's limiting. All these mitzvahs apply in Israel. That Hashem gave to you to inherit. And then the pasuk says, Kol hayamim asher techaim al adama, all your life that you're living on planet Earth. Adama means Eretz Yisrael. Adama means all around planet Earth. So now the end of the pasuk says that all these mitzvahs apply all around Israel, all around the world. And then the beginning of the pasuk says it only applies in Eretz Yisrael. So the first part of the pasuk is the limiting, and the second part of the pasuk, it makes it all inclusive. Wherever you are on planet Earth, you have to keep these mitzvahs. So how do you define it? What's the difference? But then the Torah says you have to get rid of all the avodah zaros. So since this is a mitzvah, the Gemara is going to say that since this is a mitzvah to destroy all the avodah zaros, it's a mitzvah on your body to do. It has nothing to do with the land itself. It's a mitzvah on your body. So we're going to say that that the mitzvahs that have to do with the body apply wherever you live on planet Earth. Any mitzvah that has to do with the land itself only applies in Eretz, and that's how you square off this pasuk. So let's read it inside. The Tana Rabbanan, we learned in the Brisa, Eila hachukim, the following are the laws, Eila midrashos, these are the drashas. V'hamishpatim, Eila hadinim, these are the statutes, the laws. Asher tishmrum, that you should make sure to learn. Zu Mishnah, you have to learn the Mishnayos. Lasois, zu Masa, you have to learn to do them. It's not enough to leave it in theory. Ba'aretz, now here's the point. Ba'aretz, the Torah says that you have to do it in the land of Israel. Yochel kol mitzvahs kulul yehel anagam ba'aretz. There's a half a minute to say that only all mitzvahs apply only in Israel, nowhere else. Talmud Bavli, the pasuk says, kol yamim asher techaim al adama. Torah adds that everywhere you go on planet Earth, you have to keep the mitzvahs. In your entire life, al hadama, on this earth, you have to keep. So it means it applies everywhere. If you have just the end of the pasuk, then I would say that every mitzvah applies in Eretz Yisrael and outside Eretz Yisrael. Talmud Bavli. So then the Torah says no, it applies in Israel. So it's back and forth. The Torah makes it all inclusive and says it applies all around planet Earth. And then the Torah says it's limited, only applies in Israel. So which is it? Which mitzvahs apply only in Israel, and which mitzvahs apply all around the world? Say Elamat, go and teach yourself. Look at the next pasuk. The Torah tells you that a Jew in Israel, by the way, has to destroy all the places of avodah zarah. So, ma avodah zarah yuchedus. The mitzvah of not serving idols is unique. She chayvas aguf. It's an obligation on the body, right? That applies bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz, because it applies both in Eretz Yisrael and chutz la'aretz, because it's right near the end of the previous pasuk, which it says, "Kol hayamim ashetem chaim al hadama," and that is the mitzvah of avodah zarah. So that a mitzvah of avodah zarah is a bodily type of obligation. Of kol shehi chayvas aguf, any mitzvah that's obligation on your body. The examples we're giving is kibbud avim, hashavas aveda, and mitzvahs like that apply nehegis bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz, apply both in Eretz Yisrael and chutz la'aretz. So that is the rule. The rule of thumb is that if it's a land-based mitzvah, have to do with the land of Israel, it applies only in Eretz Yisrael. But there's an exception. Chutz min arla ve'laklayim. Arla in Kalayim, the arla in Kalayim doesn't apply in in not only in Israel, but it applies elsewhere. Now, the Gemara is going to ask a question, Ibailahu. The Gemara said, the Mishnah said that Rabbi Elazar said also Chodesh. What did Rabbi Elazar mean to say? Let's look at the parsha of Chodesh. The Torah says, speak to the Bnei Yisrael, Tisavoyu el haaretz. So when you come to Israel, Uktzartam skiritzira, bring the carbon oimer, and then don't eat the new crop until the first day you bring the oimer, which is when we count the oimer, when we count Sfira. That is the day that you first day of Sfira. That when you can eat the new Chodesh. Here the Torah says so here the Torah tells you when you come to Israel, and then the Torah says that you can eat now the new crop wherever you live, and this is a law wherever it applies. Means wherever you settle. So maybe the mitzvah of Chodesh applies even in New York. That's one way to look at Moshe Seichem. Or I could say, no, this mitzvah Chodesh applies only in Israel. But, so what does Moshe Seichem means? It applies in Israel only after they settled the land. In other words, when the Yeshua came to Eretz Yisrael, it took him 7 years to conquer Israel and another 7 years to divide up the land. So only after the first 14 years, that's when the mitzvah Chodesh applies. So that's another way to learn Moshe Seichem. Moshe Seichem means after you settle in Israel, but it applies only in Israel. After the 14th year, that's when this mitzvah Chodesh applies. So let's see. It depends how you learn the word Moshe Seichem. Ibailahu, Rab Lezer Lekula Palik. Does Rab Lezer is lenient and says that the mitzvah Chodesh only applies in Israel, or Lechumra Palik, or he says it applies everywhere. Lechumra Palik, would you say that Rab Lezer says it applies everywhere? This is what the Tanakama mean to say. Chutz min Arlam and Klaim. The Tanakama says Arlam and Klaim apply in New York. The Hilchos Gemira it's halacha l'Moshe Mashinai. Even though Arlam and Klaim seem to do, it's a mitzvah that has to do with the land, it applies everywhere. Wherever you live, there's a mitzvah of Arla and Klaim. Aval, but this is what the Tanakama holds. Chodesh is ba'aretz, in b'chutz la'aretz loy. The Chodesh only applies in Israel, not b'chutz la'aretz. My timer, what's the reason of the Tanakama? Because the Torah says when you come to Israel is the mitzvah of Chodesh, and it says Moshe Seichem means Moshav. The Tanakama darshans it like Achar Yerisha Yeshiva. After you threw out all the Canaanim and you settled the land, which means after 14 years, that's when the mitzvah of Chodesh applies, albeit only in Israel. And that's the Tanakama's opinion. Also, Reb Lazar comes to say, Reb Lazar has a different understanding of the word Moshe Seichem. He says that Chodesh applies both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. Because my time, what's the reason? That the way Reb Lazar is going to learn that Moshe Seichem means Moshe Seichem wherever you live. Chodesh starts when the Jews came into Israel, but the mitzvah applies Moshe Seichem even in New York. It applies Chodesh. So that would be one way that Rabbi Lezer is going strict and say Chodesh applies even Bizman Hazeh here in New York. Maybe he's going much more lenient than the Tanakama. It's actually the Tanakama who holds Chodesh belongs in New York, but Rabbi Lezer says no, it belongs only in Eretz Yisrael. And the Hachikama Tanakama. Chutz mina Arla v'Klaim. Arla and Klaim apply in New York, the Hilchos Gemira law. And the Tanakama also says v'Kolshkein Chodesh. Chodesh applies all over, even wherever you live. Because the Tanakama learns the Moshev Kol Makom Shata Yoshim Mashma. The word Moshe Seichem, wherever you're going to live, you have to keep Chodesh. That's what the Tanakama is going to view. But also Reb Lezer comes to say, no, the opposite. Chodesh ein noyeg ela ba'aretz. Chodesh only applies in Israel. The Moshav la'achar Yerishav Yeshiva Mashma. The word Moshav means only after you settle. That's when you have to keep Chodesh, but it only applies in Israel. And then if Rav Lazar says it only applies in Israel, then why did he say af? Af it comes to say that what does the af mean? How do you explain the af? Because the Tanakama just got through saying that Arla and Klaim apply everywhere in the world, and Rav Lazar saying Chodesh applies only in Israel. So what is that? Also Chodesh. My af Akamaisis, to the first part, on like say Truma, Maestris, and all the mitzvahs that are totally in Eretz Yisrael, comes along Rabbi Lezer and says, I don't learn like you, Tanakama. I feel that the Chodesh only applies in Israel. So basically, in a nutshell, it depends how you learn this word Moshe Seichem. What did if you learn Moshe Seichem means wherever you live, that means Rabbi Lezer is going strict. If Rabbi Lezer teaches Moshe Seichem by Chodesh on the screen here, Moshe Seichem means wherever you live, you have to keep Chodesh. Then Rabbi Lezer is saying it applies here in New York also. But if you learn that Rabbi Lezer is going lenient and Kisavoyo Moshe Seichem teach you that only after you come to Israel and everybody divide up the land, and everybody got a piece of Israel, all the Shvatim, that's when you have to keep Chodesh. So, but it still only applies in Israel. That means Rabbi Lezer is going lenient. So how did Rabbi Lezer learn the mitzvah of Chodesh? Tashma, come in here. From the way Abaya explained who's going to argue Rabbi Lezer, we're going to deduce that Rabbi Lezer actually went strict and said, Moshe Seichem means wherever you live. The Amar Abaya, the Abaya said, Tashma, the Amar Abaya, man Tana the Palagala Rabbi Lezer. Who's the Tana that argues Rabbi Lezer? Rabbi Yishmael. That goes according to Rabbi Yishmael. And Rabbi Yishmael, and I'm going to explain what context Rabbi Yishmael is talking about, but get to the base. The point is, look at the Rabbi Yishmael translates the word Moishav. Lelametcha, this pasuk, we're going to see what pasuk it is. Rabbi Yishmael has a pasuk that should call Mokum Shenamba by Moshe. Whenever the Torah wrote the word Moshe Seichem or something like that, doesn't mean wherever you're going to live in the world. It means Eina Ela Achi Rishu Yeshiva. It only applies in Israel. Only after you settled the land and you got rid of the Canaanim and you settled the land. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. So basically what the Gemara is saying is, if Abaya said Rabbi Yishmael is the one who argues against Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Yishmael teaches Moshe means after Yerusha Veshiva, that means that Rabbi Eliezer holds Moshe Seichem means where Bechol Moshe Seichem, wherever you're going to live. So it must be that Rabbi Eliezer learned that the Moshe Seichem by Chodesh means that the mitzvah Chodesh applies throughout the world, even in New York. That's how we say. Just to finish this brisa, Amar Alai Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva said, "How do you, Rabbi Yishmael, make a statement wherever the Torah wrote Moshav? It means it applies only in Israel, right? I'll bring you a mitzvah that applies throughout the world, and it says Moshe Seichem." Hare Shabbos, by the mitzvah Shabbos, the Torah says, Lo Yisavaru Eish B'chol Moshe Seichem. Don't light a fire in your entire house. In B'chol Moshe Seichem. Shenema by Moshavos, and it says the word Moshe Seichem, and we know Shabbos applies everywhere. So Shabbos is universal. It doesn't matter where you live, you have to keep Shabbos. So your general rule in Chumash, that Moshe means only in Israel, after you settled in Israel, doesn't hold up when it comes to Shabbos. So Rabbi Yishmael responded to Rabbi Akiva and said, Amalei, Shabbos kal v'chayim asya. Shabbos, Moshe Seichem teaches you something else. But Shabbos, it applies universally, not because Moshe Seichem teaches you it applies universally. Moshe generally means it applies only in Israel. But the reason why I know Shabbos applies universally is Ma mitzvahs kalas. Since easy mitzvahs apply both in Israel and outside Israel, Shabbos Chamirach, Shabbos, which is such a difficult mitzvah because you get skil if you violate it, like Koshkein, of course it applies outside Israel. So the Gemara concludes. So Midda Omar Abaya, since Abaya said, Man Tana de Palagalei Rabbi Lezer, who's the Tana that argues against Rabbi Lezer? Rabbi Yishmael. Now, and how did Rabbi Yishmael learn the word Moshe Seichem? Means it applies in Israel after Yerusha Yeshiva. So must be Rabbi Lezer is the opposite of that, which is that he learns Moshe Seichem like Rabbi Akiva means Moshe Seichem throughout the world. So by Chodesh, when it says Moshe Seichem, it must be that Moshe Chodesh, according to Rabbi Eliezer, applies throughout the world. Shema Mino, Rabbi Eliezer, Achumra Palik, Shema Mino. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer is going strict and says Chodesh applies throughout the world, and Shema Mino, and that's the proof of his opinion. Now, Michdei Rabbi Yishmael Ahechakai. Let's understand what Rabbi Yishmael, context of what Rabbi Yishmael is talking about. Anasachem, pouring libations. Let's read the pasuk. The pasuk in Chumash says that Kidaber el b'nei Yisrael v'amarta alehem. Remember, you have to pour libations, wine, let's say, on the mizbeach when you bring a carbon. The Torah says when you will come to Eretz Yisrael, kisavoyol Eretz Moshe Vayseichem. It's on the screen over here. So Rabbi Yishmael asher ani nois lechem that I'm giving to you, which obviously this mitzvah only applies when the Beis Hamikdash is around, or when we have a place to bring karbanos. Only in Israel this mitzvah applies. It's not Moshe Vayseichem universally, right? And it's saying when you're going to have a big mishkan or something like that, then when somebody makes a donation, or let's say it's a carbon simber, you have to bring the following libations. If you're bringing a cow, if you bring a sheep, you bring this libation. The keves echad, riviyas ehin. If you bring a ram, you have to bring this libation and this nesachim. Okay, that's, you have to see the pasuk. But kisavoyel eretz Moshe Vayseichem. So Rabbi Yishmael says that this means to say that the libation mitzvah only applies after we settled. After we settled in Eretz Yisrael. You have to understand, when they came into Eretz Yisrael, the Mishkan was in Gilgal, and then it made it to into Mishkan Shiloh, right? It made it into Mishkan Shiloh, but till it got to Mishkan Shiloh, the Jews didn't settle Eretz Yisrael. Finally, it settled when the Jews divided up Eretz Yisrael. They moved the Mishkan to Mishkan Shiloh. Only in Mishkan Shiloh, that's what the pasuk is saying, according to Rabbi Yishmael, that you settled the land, and now you have the Mishkan in a semi-permanent place. Therefore, you bring libations. That's Rabbi Yishmael saying. But notice that this pasuk says Ki savoyu Moshe Vayseichem. When you come to Israel, Moshe Vayseichem. So that's the Gemara saying. Michte, let us ask a question. Rabbi Shmuel made his comment regarding what context on Nesachim. He's talking about pouring libations. Binisachim, when it comes to libations, we go to Amud Beis. Bi Moshev Ksub Behu. It says over there Kisavayu, and when you come to the Eretz Yisrael, the pasuk says Kisavoyel Eretz Moshe Vayseichem. So it has two words that apply, that it means Israel. One, it says Kisavoyu, and two, it means Israel, because it says coming to Eretz Yisrael. So why was Rabbi Akiva questioning him and saying that, hey, Shabbos, it doesn't say when you come to Israel. The Torah just writes, so Rabbi Shmuel could have just said, I only said my general rule that Moshe Vayseichem means only in Israel, when it says, the beginning of the pasuk says Ki Savayu, when you come to Israel and you Moshev and you settle in Eretz Yisrael. But Moshev alone doesn't mean only Israel. So right. First, the Gemara says Hachikama. This is what Rabbi Yishmael meant to say. L'lame, the teaching is, the general rule is Shekol Mokan, any place in the Torah that it says Shnema Bio Moshev, you come to Eretz Yisrael and you settle in Eretz Yisrael. It's only after you actually settled in Eretz Yisrael. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. This is the words of Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Yishmael's general rule is that Moshav, along with the word Bia, is translated, you come to Eretz Yisrael and you settled in Eretz Yisrael after the 14 years. That was the general rule of the translation of Moshav according to Rabbi Yishmael. So then what did Rabbi Akiva have a problem with Shabbos? Rabbi Akiva had a problem with Rabbi Yishmael's rule because Shabbos applies universally and it says the word Moishvez. And Rabbi Yishmael answered, Rabbi Yishmael could have just simply said that Rabbi Akiva, what do you have a problem with me? I only said my general rule wherever it says Bia or Moishav Kamina, wherever it says both words. Kisavayu and Moshe Vayseichem, not when it just says the word Moshe Vayseichem. So the Gemara says Chada v'oid kamalei. Rabbi Yishmael meant to answer Rabbi Akiva in two ways. Chada, he first meant to say Dano Bia Moshe Kamina. Rabbi Akiva, you're reading me wrong. The word Moshe Vayseichem, I can agree with you as a standalone word means throughout the world. The mitzvah applies throughout the world. But when the Torah specifically writes, Ki Sivoyu el Eretz Moshe Vayseichem, then it means that the mitzvah only applies in Israel and only after the land is settled. And that was my general rule. The Ka'amrit, Harei Shabbos, Neber Shabbos, that you said, Shabbos applies throughout the world, although it says the word Moshe Vayseichem. Even without the word Moshe Seichem, Shabbos would apply throughout the world, because Shabbos Kal V'chomer, from a Kal V'chomer, I know Shabbos applies throughout the world. So anyway, Rabbi Shmuel did not have, did not feel threatened by Rabbi Akiva's question. Now the Gemara is a new Gemara, but explaining that Gemara. There seems to be a machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. What is the machlokes? You see, the way Rabbi Shmuel learned this pasuk is a very simple way. Dabel b'nei Yisrael v'imata lehem ki savayu, when you come to Israel, el eretz Moshe Seichem, after you settle in Israel, then bring the libations. But Rabbi Akiva, he says no. He what he's trying to say, and the way you understand it is, ki savayu el eretz. When you come to Eretz Yisrael, you bring libations. But Moshe Seichem means that even during a period of time, there was a period of time in Israel until they built the Beis Hamikdash, on and off, that you could have a private mizbeach in your backyard. And Moshe Seichem means wherever you live, even if you have a private mizbeach in your backyard, that's what the Torah is telling you, that you have to bring libations if you brought a carbon in your backyard. During those times, then the bamas yachid were permitted. So the Gemara asks, B'mai kami palgi, what is the argument resting on? They're arguing that when a yachid brought a carbon in the midbar, let's say during Moshe Rabbeinu's time, if I brought a donation into Beis Hamikdash, into the Mishkan that Moshe built in the midbar, did I have to bring libations? Rabbi Shmuel says loy kiver nesachim b'midbar. Rabbi Shmuel held that they never brought nesachim into the midbar when they were in midbar, the yachid. So therefore, when the Torah says that when you come into Eretz Yisrael, when you come into Eretz Yisrael, the Yishmael is saying that by a bamas yachid, during the time when you're allowed to have a private bama during Gilgal, the 14 years, the Torah is trying to tell you that you had to bring the nesachim, and that's Rabbi Shmuel's understanding of the pasuk. The chiddush of the pasuk is that Moshe Seichem is teaching you that wherever you live, if you have a private backyard, you would have to bring a nesachim. Rabbi Akiva Sava Karvo Nesachim. That's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. I'm sorry. Rabbi Shmuel's opinion is that Yechidim never had to bring Nesachim, only when they came into Eretz Yisrael. So that's what it means, that when they came into Eretz Yisrael, that's when, you see, if I went in the midbar according to Rabbi Shmuel to bring a carbon, I didn't have to put libations on the midbar Mishkan. But after the Mishkan settled in Shiloh, that's what the Torah is telling you. Once I settled in my property, if I brought a private nedava to Shiloh Mishkan, I had to bring libations. Rabbi Akiva Sava, Kiver Nesachim Midbar. Even when I brought a private donation in the midbar, I was already putting Nesachim. So what is the Moshe Seichem according to Rabbi Akiva teaching you? It's coming to teach you that wherever you're going to be in Israel, and you have a private mizbeach, you have to bring libations. One more minute, and then we'll stop. Amar Rabbi Abaya said, I Tani de Rabbi Shmuel. This Tani de Rabbi Shmuel that said, the first Tani de Rabbi Shmuel says, Bia and Yeshiva teaches you after you Yerisha and Yeshiva. That means wherever the Torah wrote Bia and Yeshiva, that's when it means after you settled. Mapik meidach Tana de Rabbi Shmuel disagrees with the following Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. The Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, there's another Tana de Rabbi Shmuel that says, Hoya v'nember bias b'Torah stam uparat l'chol akasav be'echmen la'achir yishiv yeshiva av koil la'achir yishiv yeshiva. The Torah is telling you in another place, by when you put a king on, the Torah says when you come to Eretz Yisrael, ki sova yalaretz hashniz yishtav yishafta ba. Here the Torah writes Bia and Yeshiva, and you put a melech. So once the Torah wrote that, so the Torah is telling you that wherever the Torah is going to write Tisavayu alone, it's going to mean after they settle. Okay, we're going to continue this tomorrow, Bez Hashem.
Thank you.